Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is Trucking with Authority. I'm here today with guest host Dave Casanova, better known as Columbia Glider Dave on his own YouTube channel. We are here tonight together to be your navigators on your journey to success in the trucking business. We can talk about anything from getting started in the business as a driver to buying your first truck, becoming an owner-operator, leasing to your first carrier, switching to another carrier, or getting your own authority and running under your own MC number. We talk about dealing with brokers, dealing with the FMCSA, booking freight, working with load boards, which is going to be a lot of what we talk about today, and understanding the numbers and understanding the freight market and the lanes that you should be picking to best optimize your profits. So, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so my name is Dave Casanova. I am leased to Kenny Long, and I've been running probably since about June or July, I forget when I came on, and I've been trying different lanes and different things working at Patriot Star. And when I came over from Landstar, Landstar was very difficult to put lanes together because of their load board. It was much easier to do it here at Patriot Star, but when I came over, my goal was to make rate per mile, and to do that, I ran a lot of short miles with freight that paid very well, and I was able to do about $1.95 all miles to the truck at 80%. But I've got something that I'm working on now here, and these are going to be carrier numbers as opposed to a lease operator numbers, just because this is a Trucking with Authority podcast, and we want to keep this at the carrier level so it makes sense to everybody else. There are other opportunities now that the market conditions have changed. The lanes I came in over the summer were running from the Midwest to the Northeast, and I was trying to either run down to Virginia and then work my way back out to Michigan on what I was doing to get that high rate per mile. But again, it was on low miles. Now with market conditions changing, and I can see that they're starting to change again as well. Houston was a really strong market last week and week before, and I had a goal of trying to get down to Houston. And running these longer miles, it's profitable, but you take a little bit less per mile, but you generate more revenue for the week. And I was talking to Kenny about that to see if it made sense to run like 20-30 cents less per mile, but run 900 miles more per week. So what were your thoughts? I wrote down some numbers here and just ran them real quick with Kenny.
Well, first, before we get into that, what made you decide to try to get outside of your comfort zone and do something a little different?
I want to learn. I mean, I came to Patriot Star because at some point I'm either going to get my own authority or I'm going to stay here and learn how to run a carrier and help the guys that come up that do the van thing. I mean, you can get a flatbed and fall into money, or you can do like me and work the van because it's easier to do, but it takes a lot of thought and thinking to figure out how to get the money. So it's fun. Yeah.
All right. So it's been about 3 weeks, I guess, since you kind of changed your operation, ended up down in Florida, and then went out back up to the Northeast, and then ended up down in Texas and around. Overall, how did you feel running the different lanes? I mean, it was hot.
So I've been running a lot of trade show stuff and store fixtures and stuff, and it's lighter. So I was also able to reduce my fuel cost a little bit, but also had to run a little faster to get the miles in and deliver what I was delivering on time. But I found it more enjoyable, and it generates more revenue for the week. But I don't know at the end of the day if that's net profit, and that's what we're working out, trying to figure out if there's content here for a show. If you're only making $900 a week more, and I say only, $900 is a lot of money, but there's a lot of there's expenses and stuff that you got to figure out and back out. There's more fuel, different things. I enjoyed running more miles compared to running 2,200 miles, and a lot of people I speak to would rather run the miles than sit around and make money sitting, because it just drives them crazy. And you have to look at the two business models and decide what's right for you.
And I think that's why this is an important show, because there are so many people that are only focused on running miles. other YouTubers out there and things, they don't talk about making money. They say, get out there and go make miles, and we're not out here to make miles. We're out here to make money. But
Exactly.
If running more miles equates to more money, that makes sense. Doesn't always work that way. For a long time you were running short miles and averaging about 2,200 miles a week. And your revenue was great. You were doing fantastic with a van, and it was, a little bit more labor intensive, maybe, pad wrap, helping with the customers, a little more one-on-one, more interaction. It was definitely less no-touch freight. A lot of drivers out here want only no-touch freight. And, there's something to be said for putting that effort in, but are you making more money doing that versus can you just run harder? Now, on the flip side of that, we were breaking it down earlier, you have more seat time, less hands-on with the customer, less hands-on handling the freight, but there are more expenses, and maintenance costs and things that vary. And how does that break down over the miles? And what we found is, and you broke down, we'll go over a little bit more specifics with the numbers here in a minute, but you found that your cost per mile actually goes down with more miles.
Yep.
Because you spread that fixed cost out. And that's something that I've talked about when I talk about quoting a load, is understand that you have a daily fixed cost. You have a number that you have to cover every day, but then you also have a variable cost, for fuel and maintenance and so forth that spreads out. Now that's based just on the number of miles. Now, the other side of that is, we were just having this discussion in the other room a little while ago that, you weren't sure how to quantify the wear and tear on your truck and the extra maintenance costs, because in your
replacement of the equipment,
your initial thought process is, and what I think a lot of people, where they go with this is, well, if I'm running twice as many miles, I'm going to wear the truck out twice as fast, which in a way is true, but your cost per mile wouldn't change all that much, because your cost per mile on the variable cost, when you take the fixed costs out of that, your cost per mile on just the variable cost is always the same. So you're always going to get the same fuel economy. If you change your oil every 15 or 20,000 miles, it'll still be 15 or 20,000. It's just going to be maybe, instead of every other month, it'll be every month. Or, it just increases the service intervals. But your cost per mile is the same. So there is something to be said for, spending, we were just talking to one of our other drivers getting ready to buy a new truck, and by the time it's all said and done, it's going to be $170,000.
Wow.
Now, $170,000 for a truck that you have to throw away in 5 years versus if you can make that truck last 10 years, that does, there is a big, there's something to be said for that money out of your pocket. Now, on the other side of that, though, are you making more, by running longer miles and putting that extra money in your pocket sooner? Will your bank account be fat enough to buy that second truck, that new truck, after maybe half the amount of time or 75% of the time versus running the shorter miles like you were doing before? So it's hard to quantify where that number is. There's a line drawn somewhere.
And that's the thing. I think you have to draw a line to begin with, so you have a starting point. Because I think there is a way to run for slightly less per mile and run more miles. I just don't know what the spread would be. Like the two examples I used was the 2,200 miles that I was running. If I was running at the carrier number, all miles, it would have been 243.7, so 244 all miles. And when you compare that to the national average, that was pretty good. Okay.
Right.
Now, running, say, 3,100 miles a week, I know guys run harder than that, but you can't run consistently, at least I don't think, over 3,000 miles every single week. I guess some people do. 3,100 would be about the cap of where I would think you can do every week. Some guys run maybe 3,800 miles one week, and then they got to take a few days off. But I think you can consistently do about 3,100 miles in a 70-mile-an-hour truck, and do about 212 with a drive-in, which is right at the national average for loaded miles. And I'm saying 212 all miles. And I'm sure you see a difference there. 212 all miles is better than 212.
Significantly more. When you factor in deadhead miles, are essentially unpaid. When you look at the DAT calculations, they don't factor in that additional deadhead miles, right? So you're above average on your loaded miles by far.
Yeah. So when you compare the two examples that I had, 243 at 2,200 miles, it's roughly $5,400, 5,361. And if you compare 212 at 3,100 miles, that's 6587 for the week. If you did that consistently, that's a difference of, I think we came up with, I didn't subtract those two numbers, but after fuel, if you backed out fuel on both deals, lane A at 3,100 miles, 41 cents fuel is what I run at right now. That would be $1,271 in fuel on 3,100 miles. So if you backed out the fuel, that brings down the revenue to $5,316. And when I was only running 2,200, fuel cost was a little bit less, but I still left it at 41 cents because that's where I'm at now. I think I was down at 36 cents when I was running that lane. But let's leave it at 41. That's 902 in fuel on 2,200 miles, and that brings revenue down to $44.59. When we subtract the two after fuel, running more miles generates, even though it's at a lower rate, 31 cents per mile less per mile, it still generates $857 more after fuel for the week. So for the month, that's over, what was that, $3,400 for the month? So if you were able to do that consistently, and even if you back out, I think we got for fixed costs, I don't know what the average carrier is, but we came to the conclusion.
We tried to estimate to the best of our ability, carrier costs per truck, including all the insurances and truck payments and so forth, based on Dave's operation, and the difference between running the short miles and the long miles. Now, your cost per mile on your fixed cost, remember your variable cost, you're always going to have fuel, you always have maintenance, and those things can't change. But your fixed cost will change. Now, this is where running different lengths of haul, short haul versus long haul, do vary. And you broke down what the numbers would be, on the miles for the week.
So we came up with, I think, about $3,900, $4,000 would be a fixed cost per month for a one truck outfit. Everyone's got different numbers. I'm looking at a used piece of equipment truck is about $1,500, $1,600 a month. Some guys have brand new trucks. Some guys have no truck payment. But just an average ballpark used truck, maybe first, second year in business, came up with about $3,900, $4,000 a month. Now, when you take that and let's say you average 12,400 miles in a month, and just take the fixed costs, that works out to 32 cents per mile. That doesn't sound like very much, but if you only run 8,800 miles, that works out to 45 cents per mile. That sounds like more, but at the end of the month, it's the same amount of money you spent. So
right.
You're just spreading the costs over more miles. So I tried to back out, let's say 32 cents per mile at 12,400 miles for the month. Fixed costs for 1 week would be about $288 for the extra 900 miles. So if you just subtract $288 for the extra 900 miles that you ran at a lower rate, you're still making $569 more per week, which is still another $2,100, whatever it is, per month. So to me, it almost makes sense to run more miles at a slightly less rate per mile than it does to sit around, which is what you always say when you do your show. Anytime you sit for a day or two, what do you have to do?
You got to cover that cost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you can figure this out and make the miles run.
Yeah. Now, so there's a balance though. I mean, sometimes it makes sense to run the shorter stuff and get the great paying, $4 or $5 a mile load, but it might only be a couple hundred miles for the day, versus running, coast to coast. If you can get those $3, $4 a mile loads coast to coast, fantastic. Obviously, that's the better choice, and get the miles and the money. But there's got to be the balance. But the key point I think that we need to make is you need to know what your numbers are and where to draw that line. And when you're looking at a load that's 250 miles today versus you could get 500-600 miles today, how much more do you need to increase your rate because it's shorter miles just to make the same money to equate for the miles? Mm-hmm. A lot of times it is better, but what I have seen, now we've got the hot market map up on the other screen here from DAT, And what I have seen is that some of the specialty type markets, when you get into pad wrap and the stuff that's not no touch, the special white glove treatment type loads. When you get into that, or you get into show freight, and you get into a lot of this stuff that gets quoted out literally almost a year ahead of time. Now, and it does. I think there's a disconnect on sometimes how this works. We get quotes from some of our customers. Last October they were asking us to quote shipments for next October, this coming October. If you were in this market last October, there is no way to predict what that market would do a year later. I mean, obviously, this market has been on a roller coaster. I mean, we're seeing rates that a year ago we never would have thought we would see again. And, everybody had crossed their fingers hoping for it. Now it's just the average. And so, to quote that far out, it's difficult. A lot of customers quoted year-long annual contracts or quoted these shipments a year out, and now the rates have come up to match those. So general freight rates are at or exceeding what the specialty commodity type, freight rates would be. So we're seeing some shifts in the markets, and then you throw on top of that the seasonal freight. You've got melons down in South Florida and coming across the border in Mexico. Along with melons, you've got other crops in Florida that are harvested, which is pulling the reefers in into the van segments, trying to suck up some of the van freight to relocate their equipment. And it's changing the market for what we saw a year ago. Mm-hmm. Now, a year ago, you were probably making more money doing the shorter haul stuff than you could right now with some of the longer miles. It's kind of a coin toss where it depends on what the market is doing, but you have to have that information and be able to see what your opportunities are to get out there and get out of your comfort zone.
I completely agree with that as far as having the information, because if you look at Houston, for example, I don't know if we can zoom into this at all.
Sure.
Houston, this was part of my reasoning for why I wanted to get away from the Northeast. I got sick of having to fight to get a rate out of the Northeast. I mean, it doesn't matter that I get $4, $5, whatever it is, out of the Midwest to go to the Northeast. You can still take one more load out of Pennsylvania and work yourself a little further into the Northeast. But once you're in the Northeast, it's like a vomit fest trying to get out. It's just, it's horrible. So that was part of the reason. And then as I was watching the map here, you could see that the areas I wanted to run that were the hot areas started turning white. And I said, well, where's all the freight? And it was all down here. Now, down south was much more red than what this is right now. But like Houston is a 5.7 to 1 market right now. When I was looking at it, it was like a 9 to 1, and I could have gotten, as a matter of fact, we have an email blast that Kenny and Elizabeth set up, which is great if you're a carrier set up with 10 or 15 trucks. This is something you should absolutely do, set up an email blast, because brokers that want to use you have regular freight. That's how you get the freight that doesn't hit the load board by these sort of things. But anyway, had I not needed to come back to Orlando to take care of some business, I could have made whatever I wanted, I think, out of Houston when I was there. When I was down in Miami, I've never been to Miami in like a 9 to 1 truck market when I got my melons. I had like 4 or 5 different loads. 2 of them were like double brokered or whatever you want to call it, where I wound up not getting it and I fell off of them. But, melons in a 9, 10 to 1 market, 4,000, 4,200 to go up to the Northeast. To me, that doesn't make sense, but that's the market.
Right. Yeah, and I was just having this discussion on, one of the forums last week, and, we were talking about the Florida market, and everybody says, don't go to Florida, the rates out of there are horrible. They are horrible about 9 to 10 months out of the year, but right now, Florida is one of the best markets in the country. It's slowly starting to taper off as we come into June, and as we move into mid-June and toward the end of June, it will taper off. We're right in the middle of the market, but we are in, volume-wise, if you look at the market, 4.7 to 1 in Lakeland. Typically, the average Central Florida market is less than 1 to 1 loads to trucks. I mean, there's less loads than there are trucks. Typically, it's in fact opposite.
We're at in Miami right now.
Miami right now.
So it's half the market that So that it was?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, less than that.
It's showing 2.6 to 1. Now, I typically look at this, I think last week's show or the week before, I talked about this market, and typically 3 to 1 is a phenomenal market. But when you see Miami at 2.6, you know, you're getting into where you're in a competitive area, and you can get decent rates in and out. Now, South Florida, if you followed me a couple weeks ago,
Melons are working their way up.
Exactly. The very tip of Florida. Now, just before Mother's Day, for those of you that don't know, the airport in Miami, actually, roses are flown into the airport in Miami from South America. And pretty much the majority of all the roses in the entire country come out of Miami. They're not grown in Miami. They're grown in South America. They fly them into the airport in Miami. I don't know why they're on an airplane. Why don't they fly them somewhere else? But it's always been this way. But there are just fields and fields of nice, beautiful cut roses just before Mother's Day. So the spike before Mother's Day has to do with watermelons, one, and number two is flowers. Now, last week, South Florida near Miami Homestead area was even better than it is right now, because the week before the major holiday of Memorial Day weekend is a big holiday where watermelons are in big demand. So South Florida, Miami Homestead market, even the Naples market, you go inland to Immokalee or Arcadia, Florida. So those are some extremely good markets. Now, getting into the end of May, it's, you know, upwards of 90 degrees outside every day now. The watermelons in South Florida are beginning to turn into water grapes. Okay, so the very southern tip of Florida is starting to slow down, and you can see that reflected in the hot market map on DAT. But Central Florida is still pretty good. So Central Florida up near Ocala, you know, you're still going to have a lot of, you know, packing houses in Central Florida that are still moving a lot of melons. As we come into June, in mid-June, Central Florida is going to dry up. You're going to start seeing them up around Lake City and further north into Tifton and Macon, Georgia market for watermelons. But watermelons suck trucks and capacity from all of the other segments as well. So you're going to see reefer rates going up, and you know, you don't have to take a watermelon load out of there. You could take a general freight load, but would you rather take, you know, a dollar a mile on general freight, or would you rather take $3 a mile on watermelons? Most people would take $3 a mile on watermelons, which, to be competitive, that dollar a mile general freight has to bring their rates up as well. So you end up with both. Yeah. So now you've got competitive rates on both sides. So that's typically throughout the summer you will see this. We're already starting to see the pattern develop on the hot market map here on DAT, and because of this seasonal freight and the changes throughout the season, the Northeast is slow. The Midwest, Eastern Midwest, you know, Ohio and Pennsylvania areas are slow. Michigan is very slow right now. As we move through the summer, we get into July and August, you'll see that freight market go up from Macon, Georgia, up to Atlanta, up in through Tennessee. And by August, September, we're going to see the harvest season in the Indiana, Ohio area and up into Michigan. And you get into October, you're going to have not watermelons, but pumpkins and things coming out of the Midwest. Virginia. And then you'll start seeing, you know, the Southwest of, you know, New Mexico and things like that heating up for pumpkins and things of that nature, the hard produce that can go on a van or a reefer. And again, if the reefers can haul it, they're competing with the vans, and that also drives reefer rates up. So reefer and van markets are usually pretty sistered. When you look at the two maps, you know, overlaid, they usually have very similar trends, but typically the reefer tends to lead the vans slightly by a week or two in either direction, whether capacity goes up or down, because these harvest seasons come into effect. Especially in the summertime, you'll see reefers that are required in the more southern regions, because they have to keep this stuff cool, versus it could go on a van in a colder climate. So when we come into the summertime, less and less of this hard produce can go on the van.
Well, let me ask you this. So you're saying that if I were looking at the reefer rates, and I looked at and saw that an area was starting to get hot, the following week it could follow that the vans will pick up there as well. Is that what you're saying?
It could. Now you got to be careful though, because some things that the reefers start pulling out, corn, for example. Southern Florida has 3 seasons for corn. I believe that corn is also coming out of South Florida as well. So reefers are competing for corn and melons and the other. So that's driving rates up for everything. So they would love to put watermelons on a reefer, but if reefer can go pull corn and get more money, they need the capacity. Now they're going to push it to put it on a van. Okay. So you have to look at and see what commodity. Now another source for that is the USDA fruit and produce demand market. Okay. So you can look and see what is coming out of what areas, and it'll show where there's a truck capacity shortage. So
you can see the reefers are drying up in Miami here too.
Yep, but similar, where the same basic regions. Yep, it's starting to push up. I'll do another video, and I forgot to give out my normal plugs here. We are streaming live on Facebook, Blog Talk, and YouTube, all simultaneously right now. If you're watching the video on Facebook or on YouTube and you're driving, please turn your phone around, turn the video off, and call the number at the bottom of your screen, 917-889-9924. Press number 1. We have quite a few callers on the line. If you have any questions or comments, anything you'd like to ask Dave about, you can also check Dave out on his YouTube channel, Columbia Glider Dave.
Yes.
But he's leased to Patriot Star, works under us. He just happens to be... Okay, even happens to just be in the area today. We do have a call. We'll go ahead and take this. All right. Hey, Chris. Now, okay, let me put this little bit of a disclaimer out.
I had a question for you. Me and Jason have been talking about this for about a week now. We've been in a lot of markets where the load to truck ratio is greatly in the truck's favor. Well, we're not getting any calls on freight. Like, I think it was 88-1 out of Tampa today, and I got maybe 2 phone calls. It was the same thing in New Jersey. I know another one of our trucks up in Toledo, which is a hot market for us, didn't even receive a phone call today. Same thing with Jason out in Oregon. Phone calls are very slim on that too. I was trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, there's more loads than trucks, but there's no phone calls going out.
Okay. All right. So a couple of things. Now this goes back to what we were talking about, and let me just throw this out there quick. Obviously, we're doing things a little differently today. I don't have a guest host in the office while I'm doing this, so I've got some.
He didn't want to share his earbuds.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got some wires like spread out all over the place. I'm using one of my old microphones, and I'm pointing the camera different ways. I'm trying to make this work. So everybody out there, just bear with us. So hopefully you all can hear the caller. So what we're seeing happen is, now going back to what Dave had talked about with melons coming out of a certain area. Coming out of Florida again, you got to look at what commodities are in what market. Now, you mentioned Florida. Florida, even with the flatbed, the type of commodities that we're moving. So there's some building materials and things of that nature that are moving out of the South Florida area.
That was pretty hot for wheeled vehicles. Lots of step deck freight. Actually, there's more step deck freight than flatbed freight I was seeing, but. That too, and the calls that I made today were consistently below the DAT averages. They're I don't know how many calls today. I was like, well, you're $1 under the lane average right now. Oh, our customer, that's too much. Or, I had a couple of them that are saying, well, our customers held it on the dock for 2 weeks. We'll just keep holding it until it moves. And I know you talked about that a little while ago, but a lot of the wheeled equipment that goes on step decks is, they're not even wanting to pay the upcharge for specialized equipment plus the use of the ramps and everything else. They want to move it for cheaper than what the lane averages are.
So here's what's beginning to happen. We're beginning to see a lot of rejected bids on account of the rates. So the market is beginning to stabilize because there are too many products out here, too many commodities that cannot justify the shipping rates to correspond with the capacity that we currently have. So what I mean by that is, and I did talk about this before, and you're talking about wheeled vehicles, but let's talk about something that's even more of a commodity that can sit and wait, such as mulch. Now, mulch can go in a van. It can also go on a flatbed or step deck, but they have mulch anywhere in the country. Anywhere you go, you can get mulch. So something like mulch can sit and wait. Now, the problem with that is, if we have a lot of product that can sit and wait, it'll somewhat, be careful with how I explain this. It will somewhat throw off the market, because you'll see a lot of loads posted, but a lot of loads posted that are not ready to go or that can wait until next week. There's nothing major that has to be pushed out the door right now. Now, another thing that we're seeing is, I was just talking about this with Dave a little while ago. Even one of our own customers, we had a shipment leaving from Florida out to the West Coast, and it needed a team, and it needed, a special commodity, pad wrap, and, we were quoting numbers that we felt were fair, fair numbers for what we needed for the capacity to actually get a truck to move this freight. We just talked about Florida's a hot market. He got $4,200 going up to the Northeast, going all the way across the country, with a team and all these special requirements. It's going to require a lot more. And we were giving them numbers that were within reason, based on the market averages and, and trying to look at peak times and requiring a team and all these things. And the customer, they couldn't justify it. Now, this, again, was one of these that they had quoted these shipments out, several months ahead of time. Now, they quoted their customer, they sold their services and their commodity at a certain rate, and they took into account what their standard shipping charges would be. Well, now obviously the market has come up, with shipping, and they don't have the money. They literally don't have the money. I mean, it's not just one of those things the brokers say that's all I've got in it. They literally don't have enough money in it. They can't go back to their not the shipping customer, but the customer that bought the goods. They can't go to them and say, we're going to raise the price. I know you've already paid for it. It'd be like if you go to the grocery store, you buy a bag of chips for $1, and then the guy that's going to carry it out to your car for you says, well, on Sundays we get a premium, so today we're going to have to charge you $2 for those bag of chips. It doesn't work that way. Once you pay for those, it's hard to increase the price, and that's what's happening. So in turn, this particular customer brought in their own truck. They hired their own drivers. They rented their own truck just for this one particular shipment, and made it happen that way. And a lot of shippers right now are looking at the numbers and saying this can either sit on the dock and sit in the lot until we can justify paying these rates, or the rates come down, or we can hire our own trucks and make this happen ourselves.
Now, I think I see something else going on too, Chris. Coming from the van side, a lot of your stuff that has to go is starting to get pushed into vans. Like ingots, metal bars, what do you call those, aluminum billets?
Yeah.
Things like that are starting to get pushed into a van. There's no real good way to secure that in a van, but they don't care that
they're looking for other options
because it costs less. So what I think is also happening is you may be in an 88-to-1 truck market, but because everything is auto-posted, a lot of that stuff is like Kenny says. It's going to be the mulch, the stuff that doesn't need to move, and they're tired of making phone calls on the stuff that needs to move. So it's on the board. If you want to call them, they'll tell you what it moves for, and you can tell them yes or no. So on the van side, you have to find the loads, which is one of the videos I did at the Columbia Glider Dave YouTube channel. You want to find the loads that must move and negotiate on those. For the flatbeds, you guys are just falling into money, and I'm kind of jealous, to be honest with you. But I think that's what's going on. What's that?
It's been a drastic. It's just been a drastic change, I guess, ever since I came back to work after I took off for my wife's birthday. I'm used to fielding 50, 60 phone calls a day, and I think I might have took 25 phone calls altogether last week, and the rest was me calling out. I just and just seeing it, and we're trying to figure out what's going on or why the calls have slowed down so much.
Well, in the vans, I know for me, I tried at first when I came over, I tried to find lanes that were repeatable. That's what I always preached that to Kenny. That was my business model. And when the market changed, I looked at well, maybe I can try and get into better markets. For you, is there anything that you can do consistently and get back to, or you just wherever you wind up with the highest paying load, you just hope you do better coming out? Is that how do you run in the flatbed?
I try to stay in the Midwest. The Midwest is where all the money's at. Actually, I've hauled a lot more steel this year than I normally do on my step deck, but I mean, it's been paying like crazy.
So it's still a good market?
I'll haul a few wheeled vehicles like a Lowell or pickup trucks for the electric company and stuff, but most of the time I'll haul steel in the Midwest because it's paying so well.
So what's the market looking like right now, Kenny? Can you pull that up?
That is it. That's the market right there.
Oh, looks like everything is green.
Everything is the whole country. See that now. This is where it gets difficult because the whole country is super high demand. There's one section of like western North Dakota where it's the slowest market in the whole country is 15 to 1.
Insane.
Yeah. So it's pretty ridiculous for flatbed. We're looking at Indianapolis 30 to 1. Even down here in Tampa, Florida, where you were at 34 to 1. Up in the Panhandle, you end up getting a load out of the Panhandle 357 to 1. In the Tallahassee market, I don't think I've ever seen that number that high before. 357 to 1. 3,221 loads posted. And 9 trucks posted.
I don't know. I posted out of Panama City, Jacksonville, and Tampa today, and I think I got 15 phone calls.
You did better than me.
All together.
Okay, so the other thing that's happening is brokers are relying on relationships, and they're posting these loads out here, but they're calling the trucks they know. So they're going back to the trucks that they know that they've got in the area, that they have relationships with, rather than going on the load board and calling, making 100 phone calls to try to move one load, calling 100 different trucks. The first trucks that they try to call are the ones that they have a relationship with. The ones that they know, they already know the market for a broker is hard right now to find a truck and to come up with the rates that really is required. And so they're relying on the relationships they have to, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, to do them favors, keep them running. They're still getting phenomenal rates, but they're offering it to